Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mr. Jono, and I'm a local artist here in New Orleans. I specialize in abstract painting and prints, and not only do I show my work all over New Orleans in various galleries, but I'm also an enrichment instructor for Community Works. Today, I'm going to be showing a lesson on two-point perspective. Now, if you are familiar with two-point perspective, you may remember that last week I made a video about one-point perspective. So if you were still having a little trouble with one-point perspective, you might want to go back and review because two-point perspective could be a little confusing. If you had no problems and really enjoyed one-point perspective, then this should be an exciting lesson plan for you today. Also, this lesson plan is for students for the ages of 2nd through 5th grade. Now, even though it's specifically for 2nd through 5th graders, this lesson is appropriate for students of all ages. Now, we've been going through quarantine and staying at home with our family and friends for almost a month now. It's been 3 full weeks already, and I'd like for us to continue to stay clean, stay safe, and wash our hands. We should be washing our hands multiple times a day for at least 20 seconds. Again, if you don't know how long 20 seconds is, when you go to the sink to wash your hands, just recite the alphabet. Every time I wash my hands, I say my ABCs, and therefore I know it's been 20 seconds and all the dirt and germs are off my hands, and I'm totally clean, and I'm ready to interact with my family, and I'm ready to draw and learn all kinds of great art lessons. So remember, before you get out all your materials and before you get ready to draw and create, you want to be sure to have clean hands. All right? So let's get started. So what exactly is two-point perspective? Well, if you'll remember in our last lesson, we learned about one-point perspective. But to fully understand one- and two-point perspective, we have to understand the definition of perspective in general. So if you remember, we reviewed that last week, but I'll go over it one more time. Perspective is just a method of drawing in which we use, it's a method of drawing that we use to make three-dimensional objects appear on a two-dimensional surface. Now, there are various types of two-dimensional surfaces, but normally we're talking about a piece of paper. So, again, it's just a method that we use to make objects appear three-dimensional on a piece of paper. Now, we already learned about one-point perspective. And if you remember, one-point perspective is a perspective in which we have just one vanishing point on the horizon line. And if you're wondering what a horizon line and a vanishing point are, we're going to review our vocabulary shortly. So if one-point perspective is drawing with one vanishing point, do you assume that two-point perspective uses two vanishing points? Well, you're absolutely correct. So one-point perspective has one vanishing point on the horizon line. Two-point perspective has two vanishing points on the horizon line. And in the future, we'll learn about three-point perspective. Yes, you guessed it, there are 3 vanishing points incorporated in three-point perspective. But the trick is, not all of them are on the not all of them are on the horizon line. But don't worry about that now, we'll learn that later. We're just here to focus on two-point perspective. So the main difference between one-point and two-point perspective is the way you view the object. And what I mean by that is, with one-point perspective, even though the object appears to be 3D, we are predominantly looking at the image face on, just a straight view. It could be angled a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, but predominantly it's just a square that is staring us right in the face. Well, two-point perspective is as if we were looking at that square from the corner. So we would look at the edge of the square and we would see the square move out in both directions that way. So I know that's a little confusing to verbally grasp that, so I'll have some images to bring along. here's a simple image of a corner of a street in some unnamed city. So you can see how we have two vanishing points on the horizon line, which they're somewhere over here, and we are viewing this building, or these buildings, from the edge of that predominant building right there. So we see things going this way, and we see things going that way. So that is what two-point perspective looks like. Now, if you did your one-point perspective drawings last week, get out your drawing and see the similarities and differences between the two. So take a look at this, and then I'll show you two more images. Okay, here's another outdoor image of some birdhouses. So now this is interesting because the three-dimensional objects, which in this case are birdhouses, are not even touching each other. They're all over the page. So you can see in this image, all the buildings are touching each other, and in this image, all the objects are not touching each other. Now that may seem a bit harder to grasp and to draw, but actually, it's just as easy as the previous drawing. One more. Here is an image of maybe what the inside of your living room or bedroom looks like. You can see all the things that we have in our rooms that are drawn using two-point perspective. There's a couch, there's a table, there's a dresser. You can even use two-point perspective to draw this vase, which is not even square, it's a cylinder. But that lesson is for another day. Now that we have a visual understanding of what two-point perspective looks like, we will go over our vocabulary words and our materials. Okay, so let's review our materials first. The cool thing about these perspective lessons is that they all require the same materials. So if you remember from one-point perspective, the only things that we'll need are paper, a pencil, an eraser, and a ruler. Now the ruler is not mandatory, it just makes your lines perfectly straight. I'm going to do today's drawing without a ruler so I can prove to you that you don't need one. Also, you can see behind me that I'm using a really big sheet of paper. So the bigger the piece of paper you can find, the better the process will go for you. Now that's also not a mandatory material either. You don't need the biggest piece of paper you can find. If you only have small paper, feel free to use that. Paper from a notebook, paper from a computer printer, whatever you have is going to be good enough. I just want you to know that if you can find a big sheet of paper, it'll make your drawing a little bit easier down the line, and I'll explain that later in the video. Okay, so now that we've got our materials out of the way, I want to review our vocabulary. The vocabulary is going to be the same vocabulary that we used from lesson 1, from one-point perspective. So I'm not going to write down the definitions, but I'm going to go through the vocabulary words right now and tell you verbally what those words mean to review. If you need to see them or rewrite them, please visit my first lesson on one-point perspective, and I have a whole chart of all the vocabulary words and all their definitions. All right. So the first one is horizon line. We should all remember that the horizon line is just a straight line drawn across the piece of paper. It represents where the sky and the ground meet. So if you were to look out your window or look down the street in the field, you would see where the sky comes down and the ground comes up and they meet at a straight line. That is called the horizon line. Now on the horizon line, we're going to be putting our vanishing points. A vanishing point is just a point on the horizon line where your image that you're drawing eventually converges or vanishes to. So if you remember, perspective is the act of an image looking big from up close and appearing smaller as you go far away. Well, as you're going far away, you're traveling towards the vanishing point. All right. The next vocabulary word is horizontal line. So we're going to be using all kinds of different lines in our drawings, and a horizontal line is just a line that goes from left to right or right to left, okay? And a a vertical line is the exact opposite of that. That is a straight line that goes up and down, just like that. Now the next line is called a parallel line. Do you know what parallel means? Well, a parallel line is two lines that are alongside each other and always stay the same distance apart from each other. So if you have one line over here and then another line over here, so long as they were the same distance apart, the entire length of the line, that is referred to as a parallel line. The next vocabulary word is form. Now, when we say that we're drawing boxes, or we're going to draw a house, or we're going to draw whatever object that we're going to draw, we refer to that object as the form. So this case, in today's case, we're going to be drawing three-dimensional boxes using two-point perspective. The boxes are the form. The last word is plane. The plane is where you're drawing the form. So today, the plane is a piece of paper. Tomorrow, the plane could be, I don't know, it could be a photograph. It could be a canvas for painting. It could be all kinds of different things. It's just whatever the surface you're using to create artwork on. So the form is the artwork that you're making, and the plane is the space where the form is being placed. All right? So now that we've gone over our materials and our vocabulary, it's time to do some drawing. All right, so now we're ready to draw. I've got my paper, I've got a pencil, an eraser, and even a ruler. But I'm going to set the ruler down because I promised you I wasn't going to use it. So the first step is to draw our horizon line. Now I have this whole sheet of paper, and I'm going to draw it close to the middle. Remember to take your time and draw these lines to the best of your ability. The more careful you are with your line drawing, the easier this whole process will be. All right, step one, draw your horizon line. Well, that's a little hard to see. I'm going to go over it with a marker. All right, much better. Now, the reason I said earlier that it would be best if you could get a big sheet of paper is because the further away you have your vanishing points, the more realistic your drawing is going to be. If your vanishing points are really close to each other, it's going to distort the final image that you draw. Now, one is not right and the other is not wrong. It's just a piece of information that I like to share along, and you should experiment with both. What does it look like when the vanishing points are far away? And what does it look like when they're really close? So today, we'll start with the vanishing points very far away. So I'm going to put my two vanishing points on the horizon line, my two vanishing points on each side of the horizon line. It will look like this. Notice that I'm putting them very close to the edge of the paper. Okay, so now we have our first two steps done. We've drawn the horizon line, and we put our two vanishing points on the horizon line. Now this is where your creativity comes in. We have to decide where we want to draw the cube. Do we want to draw it above the horizon line in the sky, or do we want to draw it below the horizon line on the ground? One will make it appear like the image is way up in the air and we're looking at it from the ground, and the other one will appear as if the image is way on the ground and we're looking at it from the air, like a bird. I'm going to draw mine on the bottom. You can draw it wherever you want. The only thing that you should remember is that you want to leave a little space between the horizon line and your line, your vertical line, whether it's here or there. And you want to put your vertical line somewhere in the middle of the plane. I wouldn't put it way over here or way over there because, again, you'll get an image that's a little distorted and it looks a little funny. And if you like that, please do that and experiment with that decision. But for now, I'm going to put my horizon line, or excuse me, my vertical line right here. Now again, you can tell that it's not a straight line. So if you have a ruler, it would be best to use a ruler. But if you don't, just take your time and do the best that you can in drawing straight lines. Remember, there's no right or wrong in art. It's just what you prefer. So, now that we have our horizon line, our vanishing point, and the very beginning of our object, which is a vertical line, we're going to start to make this object appear three-dimensional. So the first thing you want to do is pick one of your vanishing points, and you want to draw a line from the vanishing point to the top of the line, of your vertical line, and then another one from the vanishing point to the bottom of your vertical line. And you're going to want to do that on both sides. Now, one thing you might want to consider is that towards the end, we're going to start erasing some of the lines that we don't need. So from here on out, draw your lines pretty lightly or be prepared to erase part of the lines when we're finished. Now I have to draw with a marker so you can see, so I'm going to be unable to erase my lines, so I'm going to use dotted lines. You don't have to use dotted lines, you can use any kind of lines you want, just be sure that they're straight and you've tried your hardest to do the best that you can. Alright, so let me show you what that looks like. I'm going to take my dotted line and go from here to here, just like this. Can you see that? That's hard to see. Let me see if I can move us a little closer. Okay, so you can see the dotted lines we have right here. I'm going to do it again to the bottom of the vertical line. All right. So now we've got to do that on the other side. All right, so now you can already see that it's starting to take shape a little bit. If you remember this image, it's very similar to what we're drawing. You can see the edge of the building right here. That's the same line that we drew right here, and you can see how the vanishing points are the guidelines are coming straight to the vanishing points. Now the only difference between this drawing and my drawing is that this drawing went above the horizon line, and we're drawing below the horizon line. Well, I'm drawing below the horizon line. You might be drawing above. Okay, so we're going to have an image that's very similar to this when we're finished. So the next thing that we have to do is draw two more vertical lines. So if we're looking at one edge of our box right here, we want to draw two more lines, vertical lines, that represent the back edges of the box. Now this is another spot where your creativity can come in. Do you want to draw the line really close to this, the original line, or do you want to draw it really far? It's up to you. I'm going to draw on one side, I'm going to draw one really close, and on the other side, I'm going to draw one really far. Now it's really important to not only draw these vertical lines on each side of our initial line, but we also want to make those lines parallel with each other. All three of these lines, I'm going to go ahead and draw my lines right now. There's one, and then I'm going to come way over here. There's two. So, we want to be sure that all three of these lines are parallel with each other. Now, if you remember, parallel lines are lines that are drawn right next to each other that are the same distance apart. So what I mean by that is from here to here is the same point, the same distance as from here to here. If your line is straight, that shouldn't be a problem. Okay? So now we've got almost our entire, well, not almost our entire box. We have half of our box drawn right now as it is. So the next thing we need to do is draw another set of from each vanishing point. So I wish that I had different color markers so I could separate the different groups of guidelines that we're drawing, because we already have 2 sets of guidelines and we need 2 more sets. So what I've done is I've numbered the sets of guidelines so we don't get confused. So we have the first set of guidelines, the second set of guidelines, and now we need to add 2 more sets of guidelines. So the difference between the third set of guidelines and the first set of guidelines is going to be where they end. So if you remember, the first set of guidelines ended right on this first line that we drew. Well, now the third set, we're going to draw all the way over to this line that we drew, okay? And also, when we get to this side, we're going to draw all the way over to this line. So, in other words, the lines from this side of the paper are going to end on this side of the paper, and the lines from this side of the paper are going to end on this side of the paper. So let me draw that for you right now. All right, there's one. And don't worry if your lines intersect, or your guidelines intersect the vertical lines that we drew. We're going to erase these guidelines when we're all done, and you'll never see them. No one will ever know. So let's do the second guideline right here. Okay? Now that was a really crooked line, so I hope you can do a better job than I just did. So we went from here, the third set of guidelines went from that side to that edge, to the top edge of that line, and from this side to the top edge of that line. Okay? Or the bottom edge of that line, excuse me. So now let's do the same thing from this side of the paper. And we're going to end it right here. Alright, now that looks really confusing, but in fact, we've just finished our box. So, I'm going to trace our 3-dimensional box so you can see it more clearly, and we'll know where to erase those guidelines. So give me 1 second. I'm just going over our vertical lines that we drew, and now I'm going to connect the guidelines to the vertical lines. There you have it. That is a box in 2-point perspective. So now, the only thing we have left to do is to clean up all of our guidelines and leave just this beautiful box that we drew. So if you have your eraser handy, you can start erasing all of our guidelines, well, and all of our notes that we took to ensure that we were doing the right thing. So you can erase the numbers and the guidelines and trace your box so you don't erase that. So this is what a 3-dimensional box looks below the horizon line. So we've got a couple minutes left, so I'm going to draw one really fast above the horizon line so you can see what they both look like. So the first thing we do is after we have our horizon line and our 2 vanishing points, we draw our vertical line. And it's going to look like this. I'm going to go way up at the top. I'm going to make this box much smaller than the bottom box. Okay, so remember now, we're going to take our first set of guidelines and starting at the vanishing point, we're going to connect them with our vertical line right here. It looks like this. All right. Now we're going to do the same thing with our second set of guidelines from here to here. And it looks like this. Okay. Now, The next thing we have to do is to draw 2 more vertical lines, one on each side of our first vertical line. And if you remember, this is where your creativity comes in, and you can draw that vertical line anywhere you want in between these guidelines. So I made this box really big, so I'm going to make this box really small. Okay, now you can start to see our box taking shape. So now that we've drawn our first and our second set of guidelines, we want to draw our third and fourth set of guidelines. So I'm going to draw the third set. Remember, it goes from this vanishing point to the far vertical line. And it's okay if we draw our guidelines through our box. Now let's do the same thing with our fourth set of guidelines. We're going to start them here and end them on this side of the box. All right. Now we've got that completed, and it looks a little weird, so we're going to outline our true lines and erase our guidelines. And it looks like this. All right, there you have it. So now we've got one box below the horizon line and one box above the horizon line. So now you can take some time, now that you know all the rules and the whole process for 2-point perspective, you can get you another sheet of paper and you can draw a few boxes and start to experiment with that. And just like anything else, the more you work, the more you practice, the harder you try, the better and quicker you will become at what you're doing. Now that we have all that information locked into our brains, let's take a little time to review and possibly ask some questions or leave some comments for one another. Just like 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective requires you to draw a horizon line, vanishing points, and your guidelines. Now, it doesn't matter where you want to draw your box, either above or below the horizon line. That is totally up to you. So if you were really excited and you did a really great job and you completely understand 2-point perspective, feel free to leave some comments in the comment section right below this video. For some of us who are having a little bit more trouble or it's a little bit more confusing, any kind of comments or tips that you might have learned would be really helpful. Maybe you can even teach me something that I didn't realize. Most importantly, we want to all make and create art together. It's a collaborative movement, and we need each other's thoughts and creativity to bounce off of one another in an effort to become the best artists that we can be. Now, if you were struggling and you have some questions or you thought of something that wasn't clearly explained or you need help with something, you can leave a question in the comments section and we'll be able to get back to you as soon as possible. So don't get frustrated, don't give up. All you have to do is think about what you're having trouble with and ask me a question below and I'll be happy to answer it. Maybe someone else from across the city is watching this video and they can answer your question. Maybe we can all work together and creating some information that we can pass along to each other in an effort to make everyone the best artist they can be. So, were you able to draw a 3-dimensional object in 2-point perspective? Were you able to relate the similarities from 1-point perspective to 2-point perspective? Did you see any similarities? Did you see no similarities? Are there only differences? Think about what you learned and how it applies to what you've already learned and see where there's room to grow. Also, were you able to apply the vocabulary to the drawing that you made? Can you tell me what a horizon line is? Can you tell me what a parallel line is? Is a vanishing point also something that you understand? Be sure to review these vocabulary words because the more you know them and the more you memorize, the easier it will be to talk to your teachers and your friends about what you learn. Did you have any problems with the demo? Like I said earlier, do you need some questions answered? Do you need some comments shared with one another? Feel free to express those comments and questions as much as you'd like. Now, most importantly, do you understand do you understand 2-point perspective enough to move on to 3-point perspective? Each one of these lessons is built on the foundation from what you learned before. So what I mean by that is, if you're struggling with 2-point perspective, it might be because you still are struggling with 1-point perspective. So be sure that you fully understand each lesson before you move on to the next one. Now, once again, my name is Mr. Jono, and I've had a wonderful time showing you all these different types of drawings. I hope that you will pay close attention to them and incorporate them in your own artwork. Once again, leave any questions and comments that you might have, and now that we're finished, let's all go to the bathroom and wash our hands and get ready for the next task of the day. Remember, you want to wash those hands for 20 seconds. So I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you again on the next video.